wind slammed against the diner windows so hard that the glass rattled in its frame, and Mia Ellison nearly dropped the tray in her hands when the front door burst open without warning. 6 men walked in together, moving like a single creature instead of 6 separate people, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment their boots hit the tile floor. She had worked the night shift at Cedar Root Diner for almost 2 years, and she thought she had seen every kind of customer the highway could send her way. Truckers with tired eyes, teenagers sneaking out past curfew, old couples who ordered the same slice of pie every single night, without fail. But she had never seen anyone like the man walking in front of this group. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that looked like it had been pushed back by wind rather than a comb. His eyes were a strange shade of amber, almost gold under the diner's fluorescent lights, and when he looked at her, just for a second, she felt something tighten in her chest that she couldn't explain. She told herself it was nothing, just a tired mind playing tricks after a long shift. "Table for 6, the man beside him said. He was younger, with a sharp jaw and restless energy, the kind of person who never quite stood still. He didn't ask. He announced it, like the diner existed simply to serve his convenience. "Of course," Mia said, keeping her voice calm and polite, the way she always did. "Right this way." She led them to the long booth near the back window, the one reserved for large groups, and passed out menus without making a fuss. She had learned a long time ago that some people needed to feel important, and the fastest way through a difficult table was to give them exactly that feeling, without letting it cost her anything real. The tall man with amber eyes sat at the end of the booth, closest to the window, and he watched her the entire time she spoke, not in the way men sometimes watched her, the kind of look she had grown used to ignoring. This was different, sharper, like he was trying to solve something. "Rough night?" she asked him, mostly to fill the silence. "You could say that," he answered. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of someone used to being obeyed without needing to raise it. She nodded and moved down the table, taking drink orders, refilling water glasses, doing the small tasks that made up most of her nights. The younger man with the sharp jaw, the one who had spoken first, kept glancing at her with an expression she didn't like. It wasn't interest. It was closer to irritation, like her presence itself was an inconvenience to him. When she reached his spot at the table and set down his glass, some of the water splashed over the rim and landed on his sleeve. "Watch it," he snapped, jerking his arm back. "I'm so sorry," Mia said quickly, already reaching for a napkin. "Let me get that." "Don't bother," he said, standing so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the diner's quiet hum of late-night conversation and clinking silverware. A few other customers glanced over, then quickly looked away, sensing something they didn't want to be part of. Mia straightened, holding the napkin awkwardly in her hand. "It's just water. I can get you a towel from the back if you'd like." "You don't understand who you're talking to," he said, his voice dropping into something colder. The tall man at the end of the booth, the one with amber eyes, spoke sharply. "Callum, sit down." But Callum didn't sit down. But he stepped closer to Mia instead, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to keep looking at him. Up close, there was something wrong with his eyes. They seemed to shift, just for a moment, from ordinary brown to something with a strange golden ring around the edge, gone again before she could be sure she had seen it at all. "Callum," the tall man said again, more forceful this time, and the whole table seemed to feel the weight in his voice, even if Mia couldn't understand why. Callum ignored him completely. He leaned in toward Mia, and something shifted in the air around him, a pressure she felt against her skin like static before a storm. It wasn't loud, it wasn't visible, but it pressed against her chest, heavy and deliberate, the way thunder rolls through a room before the sound of it even arrives. She had never felt anything like it in her life, and yet, some small, quiet part of her recognized it instantly, the way you recognize a smell from childhood, without knowing why it feels so familiar. The other men at the table went still, not just quiet, but frozen, the kind of stillness that comes from expecting something specific to happen, and bracing for it. Callum's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on hers, and the pressure around her grew heavier, pushing down like an invisible hand pressing on her shoulders, urging her knees to buckle, urging her voice to disappear, urging her to look away and shrink back the way every instinct in a normal person's body would demand. Mia felt none of that pull. She stood exactly where she was, holding the damp napkin, and looked back at him with the same patient expression she gave difficult customers every single week. If anything, her eyebrows drew together slightly, more confused than afraid, the way someone looks at a child throwing a tantrum they don't quite understand. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked him. "You look a little pale." The words landed in the room like a dropped plate. Callum blinked. Whatever he had expected, this clearly wasn't it. The pressure in the air didn't disappear, but it faltered, wavering like a candle flame caught in a sudden draft. At the end of the table, the tall man with amber eyes rose slowly to his feet. He didn't say anything at first. He simply watched Mia with an intensity that made the rest of the diner fade into the background, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the low murmur of the television above the counter, dissolving into nothing. "Callum," he said a third time, and this time, his voice carried something that made every man at the table sit up straighter, shoulders squaring, chins lowering slightly, as though an invisible weight had settled over the entire booth. "That's enough." Callum stepped back immediately, the pressure vanishing from the air all at once, like a held breath finally released. He sat down hard, his face pale now instead of Mia's, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Mia looked between the two men, sensing that something important had just happened, something she didn't have the pieces to understand. She smoothed down her apron and offered the table a smile that was steadier than she felt inside. "I'll bring some extra napkins," she said, "and I'm sorry again about the water." She turned and walked toward the back of the diner, aware of every step, aware of the tall man's eyes following her the entire way. Her heart was pounding harder than it should have been for something so small. A spilled glass of water. A rude customer. She had handled worse before, without her pulse ever rising like this. But something about the pressure she had felt, the way it had pushed against her and found nothing to push against, left a strange hum under her skin, like a phone vibrating in another room. Familiar, distant, almost like a memory trying to surface after being buried for a very long time. In the kitchen, she leaned against the steel counter for a moment and pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. "You good out there?" asked Denny, the night cook, without looking up from the grill. "Yeah," she said, though her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Just a difficult table. Want me to handle it?" "No," she said, straightening up and grabbing a stack of napkins from the shelf. "I've got it." She walked back out with her chin up and her expression calm, the same face she always wore, the one that had gotten her through 2 years of impossible customers and long, tiring nights. But underneath it, something new had woken up, something she didn't have a name for yet, coiling quietly at the base of her spine, like it was waiting to be called. At the table, the tall man watched her return, his amber eyes narrowing slightly, as she set down the napkins without a single tremble in her hands. "Anything else I can get you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly ordinary. None of them answered right away. Callum stared down at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. The others glanced between him and the tall man, clearly waiting for some kind of signal about how to behave. Finally, the tall man spoke. "We're fine," he said. "Thank you." Mia nodded and moved on to check her other tables, unaware that behind her, 6 pairs of eyes remained fixed on her back, long after she had walked away, unaware that the tall man's mind was already turning over the same question again and again, refusing to let it go. Who was she? And why hadn't she felt a single thing that should have brought her to her knees? Draven Blackthorn sat back down slowly, but his eyes never left the waitress moving between tables at the far end of the diner. His pack, the 6 men who had walked in with him, remained silent around him, none of them daring to speak until he gave them permission. He had ruled the Blackthorn territory for nearly 6 years, since the night his father died defending the northern border from a rival pack that no longer existed because of what Draven had done to it. In that time, he had learned to read danger the way other men read newspapers, quickly and without needing to think about it. He knew the signs of a threat before it fully arrived. He knew the weight of another wolf's presence the moment it entered a room, even if that wolf tried to hide what it was. And every instinct in his body was telling him that the woman clearing plates 3 tables away was not entirely human. "Draven," said Foster, one of his senior guards, keeping his voice low enough that only the table could hear. "What was that?" "I don't know yet," Draven said. Callum tried a dominance push, Foster continued. A real one. I felt it from here. She should have gone down on her knees. Beside him, Callum sat with his jaw tight and his hands folded on the table, refusing to look at anyone. He hadn't expected his push to fail. Wolves use that kind of pressure on humans all the time to keep them calm, to make sure no one asked questions they shouldn't ask, to smooth over the moments when their world and the human world came too close together. It always worked. Humans felt a wave of unease, maybe a headache, sometimes a sudden urge to walk away and forget what they'd seen. They never simply stood there confused, asking if he was feeling all right. She's human, Callum muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. She has to be. There's no scent on her, no mark, nothing. There was something, Draven said quietly. For half a second, before you pushed, her eyes. The table went still. What about her eyes? Foster asked. Gold, Draven said. Just a flash, gone before I could be sure. No one spoke for a long moment. In their world, gold eyes belonged only to wolves, and even then, only certain bloodlines carried that particular shade, the deep amber gold that ran through royal lines going back generations. Draven's own eyes carried that same color, inherited from a family line that stretched back further than most packs could trace their history. That's not possible, Callum said. The old bloodlines that carried true gold were wiped out decades ago, before any of us were born. I know the history, Draven said, his voice sharper than he intended. Callum fell silent immediately. Draven watched Mia set down a plate at another table, laughing softly at something an elderly customer said to her, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind her back. There was nothing about her that suggested royalty, or power, or any connection to the old wars that had shaped their world before either of them was born. She wore a simple uniform, plain sneakers, her dark hair pulled back into a low ponytail that had started coming loose after a long shift. She looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a tired young woman working a job that didn't pay enough for how hard she worked it. And yet, I want to speak with her, Draven said. Draven, we should just leave, Foster said carefully. If she's something we don't understand, the safest thing is distance. Let the elders deal with it, if it becomes a real concern. I'm not asking the elders anything yet, Draven said. I want to understand what I felt before I make it anyone else's problem. Callum shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And if she really carries old blood? What then? Draven didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't fully know. Pack law was clear about unregistered wolves, about hidden bloodlines that hadn't sworn loyalty to any territory. They were considered risks, unknown variables, that could destabilize the careful balance between packs that had taken generations to build after the wars ended. Law demanded they be reported, investigated, sometimes contained. But something about the calm, unbothered way she had looked at Callum, completely unaware of the storm she had just weathered without flinching, made Draven reluctant to think of her as a risk to be contained. Excuse me, he said, raising his hand slightly as Mia passed near the table again, with a fresh pot of coffee. She stopped immediately, her professional smile sliding back into place. Yes? Can I get you something? A moment of your time, if you don't mind, Draven said. I'd like to apologize properly for my friend's behavior earlier. Mia glanced at Callum, who still refused to meet her eyes, and something in her expression softened slightly, the way it did whenever she sensed someone was struggling with more than they let on. It's really all right, she said. No harm done. Still, Draven said, I'd feel better knowing you weren't upset by it. She studied him for a moment, and Draven had the distinct impression that she was reading him just as carefully as he was reading her, which was unusual for a human, most of whom avoided eye contact with him entirely, without understanding why their bodies urged them to look away. I'm not upset, she said simply. People have bad nights sometimes. It happens. That's a generous way to look at it. She shrugged lightly. Not really. I've had plenty of bad nights myself. Doesn't mean I want someone else's forgiveness rationed out to me like it's something rare. Draven felt something shift in his chest at that, an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the strange gold flash he thought he'd seen in her eyes. She spoke to him the way almost no one did anymore, without the careful deference that came from either fear or ambition. She had no idea who he was, and it showed in every word she said. What's your name? He asked. Mia, she said. Mia Ellison. I'm Draven. She nodded, as though the name meant nothing to her, which of course it wouldn't, since she had no reason to know it. Outside the packs, very few humans had ever heard the name Blackthorn, and even fewer understood what it meant. Well, Draven, she said, glancing toward the coffee pot in her hand, I should get back to my other tables before my manager decides I've forgotten how to do my job. Of course, he said. Thank you for your patience tonight. She offered him a small, genuine smile before walking away, and Draven watched her go, his mind working faster than it had in months. You're really going to let this go? Callum asked once she was out of earshot. I didn't say that, Draven replied. Then what are you planning? Draven leaned back against the booth, his eyes still tracking Mia as she refilled coffee at a table near the front window, laughing at something a trucker said to her, completely unbothered by anything that had happened only minutes earlier. I'm going to find out exactly what she is, he said quietly, before anyone else does. Foster frowned. And if the elders learn about this before you finish looking? They won't, Draven said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had kept his pack united for 6 years, without a single serious challenge to his position. Not until I decide they need to. Callum's jaw tightened again, but he said nothing, and Draven noticed the way his beta's eyes lingered on Mia a moment too long before looking away, something calculating passing behind his expression that Draven chose not to examine too closely. Not yet, not with everything else demanding his attention. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows and sending dead leaves scattering across the parking lot in tight, spinning circles. Draven barely noticed. His entire focus remained fixed on the woman moving easily between tables, utterly unaware that she had just become the single most important mystery in his life. The diner finally quieted down after midnight, the last of the regular customers trickling out until only the booth by the window remained occupied. Mia moved through her closing routine on autopilot, wiping down tables, refilling napkin holders, stacking chairs on the tables she had already cleaned, all while trying to ignore the strange awareness humming under her skin whenever she passed near the group of men who refused to leave. She told herself it was nothing. Strange customers came through all the time, truckers who talked to themselves, couples who fought loudly in the parking lot. A group of well-dressed men lingering long after their food was finished wasn't the strangest thing she had seen this year. But she couldn't shake the memory of the pressure that had pushed against her chest earlier, or the odd, tingling recognition that had answered it from somewhere deep inside her, like two magnets finding each other across a crowded room. You're staring again, Denny said, appearing beside her with a rag in hand, nodding toward the booth by the window. I'm not staring, Mia said. You've refilled that same coffee pot 4 times in the last hour. It's called good customer service. Denny snorted, but didn't push further. He had worked with Mia long enough to know when she wanted to talk about something, and when she wanted to be left alone, and tonight clearly fell into the second category. At the register, Mia rang up the final bill for the booth by the window and carried it over herself, even though it would have been easier to slide it across with a passing server. Something about the tall man named Draven made her want to look at him one more time before he disappeared back into whatever life had brought him through her diner on a random Tuesday night. Here you go, she said, setting the check down gently. No rush. Thank you, Draven said, his eyes lifting to meet hers again, and once more she felt that strange pull, like standing too close to the edge of something, without understanding the drop below. Long drive ahead of you? She asked, more out of habit than genuine curiosity. Something like that, he said. Our car had some trouble a few miles back. We're waiting on someone to bring us a replacement part. That explains why you've been here so long, she said, offering a small smile. I was starting to think you just really loved our coffee. It's not bad, he said, and for the first time all night, something like real amusement flickered across his expression. Callum, sitting across from him, made a quiet, disbelieving sound in the back of his throat, clearly not sharing his alpha's newfound charm. Mia glanced at him briefly, noting the tightness still lingering around his eyes, the way he refused to look directly at her even now. I really am sorry about earlier, she said to him directly, surprising herself with the impulse. If I did something to upset you, that wasn't my intention. Callum's eyes snapped up to hers, sharp and searching, as though trying to determine whether she was mocking him. When he found nothing but sincerity in her expression, something in his posture shifted slightly, uncertain. "You didn't do anything," he muttered finally. "I overreacted." "Well, apology accepted either way," she said lightly, before turning back toward the counter to grab a fresh pot of decaf for the 2 truckers who had just walked in, their arrival signaling the start of the diner's slow overnight lull. As she walked away, Draven leaned toward Callum, his voice dropping low enough that only his beta could hear. "You felt it too," Draven said. "It wasn't a question." Callum hesitated before nodding once, reluctantly. Something about her presence, when she stood there and just absorbed it, like my push hit a wall that wasn't supposed to exist. "Do you regret trying it?" "I regret that it didn't work the way it should have," Callum said honestly. "I don't like not understanding something that's supposed to be simple." Draven studied his beta for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal about his own suspicions. He trusted Callum, had trusted him since they were young wolves training together under the previous alpha's watchful eye. But trust and shared judgment weren't always the same thing, and Draven had learned the difference the hard way more than once. "I want you to look into her," Draven said finally, quietly. "Family history, where she grew up, any relatives still living, everything you can find without drawing attention." Callum's eyebrows rose slightly. "You think she's connected to something?" "I think," Draven said carefully, "that we felt something tonight that shouldn't exist anymore. And I want to understand it before it becomes someone else's discovery instead of ours." Foster, sitting further down the booth, glanced between them with a troubled expression. "And if the elders find out we're investigating a possible hidden bloodline without reporting it immediately? Then I'll deal with that when it happens," Draven said, his tone final enough that no one at the table pushed the subject further. Outside, headlights swept across the parking lot as a truck pulled in carrying the replacement part their vehicle needed. Foster rose to meet the driver, leaving Draven alone at the booth with Callum, both of them watching Mia as she moved behind the counter, laughing quietly at something one of the truckers said, utterly unaware that she had become the center of a conversation that could reshape the balance of power across 3 territories. "She doesn't know what she is," Callum said quietly. "Does she?" "No," Draven said. "I don't think she has any idea at all. That makes this more dangerous, not less." Draven didn't disagree. An awakened bloodline that understood its own power could be reasoned with, negotiated with, brought carefully into the fold of pack politics through proper channels. But a bloodline that had never awakened, that had no idea what slept beneath its skin, was unpredictable in ways that made even seasoned alphas nervous. If something triggered a full awakening without warning, without guidance, the results could be catastrophic, both for Mia and for anyone standing near her when it happened. "We need to move carefully," Draven said. "No one else finds out about this until I say so. Not the elders. Not the other packs, no one." Callum nodded slowly, though something behind his eyes remained troubled, a private calculation Draven couldn't quite read. Foster returned a few minutes later, informing them that the part had arrived and the car would be ready within the hour. Draven nodded absently, his attention still fixed on the counter where Mia worked, humming quietly along with the radio playing behind her, moving through the small rituals of her ordinary life, with no idea that 6 wolves sat only a few feet away, quietly deciding her fate. When it finally came time to leave, Draven rose from the booth and approached the counter one last time, watching Mia's face carefully as she looked up at him. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "You handled a difficult table with more patience than most people could manage." "It's part of the job," she said, smiling easily. "Drive safe out there. That wind isn't letting up anytime soon." "We will," he said. He hesitated, then added, "I imagine we'll be passing through this way again before long." Something in his tone made her look at him a little more closely, though she couldn't have said exactly what she noticed. "Well, you know where to find good coffee then." "I do," he said. He turned and walked toward the door, his pack falling into step behind him, and Mia watched them go, unable to shake the feeling that something important had happened tonight, something she didn't yet have the words to describe. She stood at the window for a moment after the door swung shut, watching their taillights disappear down the dark highway, before shaking her head and returning to her closing tasks, telling herself once again that it was nothing. She had no way of knowing that Draven Blackthorn had just made a decision that would upend both of their lives completely, or that the quiet hum beneath her skin was the first stirring of a power that had been sleeping inside her since the day she was born. 3 days later, Mia woke up before her alarm, her body tense for no reason she could name. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, listening to the pipes creak in the walls and the distant sound of traffic outside her window, waiting for the strange, restless feeling to pass. It didn't. She had felt off ever since that night at the diner. Not sick exactly, not tired either, though she certainly hadn't been sleeping well. It was more like something had shifted slightly out of place inside her, a puzzle piece, turned just a few degrees from where it belonged, close enough to almost fit, but not quite settling into position. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from her brother, Colin, asking if she could send some extra money before the end of the week. She sighed, rubbing a hand over her face before typing back a quick reply promising to figure something out. Colin had always struggled more than she had, ever since their grandmother passed away 2 years ago, and left them both to fend for themselves in a world that hadn't been particularly kind to either of them. She thought of her grandmother often, especially on mornings like this one, when the ordinary weight of her life felt heavier than usual. Her grandmother had raised her from the age of 6, after Mia's parents died in an accident she barely remembered, and though she had been strict in ways Mia hadn't always understood as a child, there had also been a fierce, protective love in everything she did. Mia remembered one conversation in particular, from when she was maybe 12 years old, sitting on the porch of her grandmother's small house, while the older woman brushed out her long dark hair with slow, careful strokes. "You come from strong people," her grandmother had said quietly, almost to herself. "Stronger than you'll ever know, but strength like that can be dangerous, if it's not understood. Better to keep it quiet. Better to let it sleep." At the time, Mia had assumed she meant something abstract, the kind of thing grandmothers said to make ordinary children feel special. She hadn't thought about it again in years, not until 3 nights ago, when a stranger's pressure had pushed against her chest and found nothing to grab onto, like a wave crashing over a rock that refused to move. She got up and got ready for her shift, pushing the memory aside the way she always did when something felt too big to examine closely. By the time she arrived at the diner that afternoon, the strange restlessness had settled into something more like background noise, easy enough to ignore as she clocked in and tied her apron around her waist. The diner was busier than usual for a weekday afternoon, and she spent the first few hours in a steady rhythm of orders and refills, grateful for the distraction. It wasn't until nearly 6 in the evening that she noticed a woman sitting alone in a corner booth, watching her with an intensity that made the hair on the back of Mia's neck rise. The woman looked to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, pale eyes that tracked Mia's every movement. She hadn't ordered anything yet, despite having been seated for nearly 20 minutes, and something about her posture, upright and alert despite her apparent age, struck Mia as unusual. "Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" Mia asked, approaching the table with her notepad ready. "Coffee, please," the woman said. Her voice carried a faint accent Mia couldn't quite place. "Black. Coming right up." When Mia returned with the coffee, the woman studied her face for a long moment before speaking again. "You have your mother's eyes," she said quietly. Mia froze, the coffee pot still in her hand. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "Not directly," the woman said, "but I knew your grandmother, a long time ago, before either of us had gray hair." Mia set the pot down carefully, her pulse quickening. "You knew my grandmother. How?" "We ran in the same circles once," the woman said, her eyes never leaving Mia's face. "Before she disappeared with you and your brother, and made sure no one could find either of you again." A cold feeling spread through Mia's chest. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "I think you do," the woman said gently. "Or at least, some part of you does, even if you haven't put the pieces together yet. Tell me, has anything strange happened to you recently? Something you couldn't explain?" Mia's mind flashed immediately to the diner 3 nights ago, to the pressure against her chest, and the strange golden flash she thought she'd glimpsed in a stranger's eyes when she looked in a mirror later that night, gone before she could be certain it had been real at all. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. The woman smiled, though there was something sad in the expression. "It's all right. You don't have to trust me yet. My name is Ivy. I was a friend of your grandmother's, back when she still went by a different name than the one she gave you." A different name? Elena Ashmore, Ivy said quietly. That was her name before she became Rosalind Ellison and disappeared into the human world to keep you and your brother safe. The words landed like a physical blow. Mia had never heard the name Ashmore before in her life, and yet something about it settled into her chest with an eerie sense of recognition, the way a forgotten song suddenly returns to memory the moment the first few notes play. I think you should leave, Mia said, though her voice lacked conviction. I understand if you're frightened, Ivy said, not moving from her seat. But I didn't come here to hurt you, Mia. I came because I've been searching for your family for a very long time, and I believe something happened recently that finally allowed me to find you again. Something that stirred up energy your grandmother worked very hard to keep hidden. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her notepad. What kind of energy? Ivy leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even further. The kind that belongs to a bloodline most people believe was wiped out generations ago. A bloodline that once ruled over territories far larger than anything the current packs control. A bloodline that certain powerful families would very much like to either recruit or eliminate, depending on how threatened they feel by its return. Packs, Mia repeated slowly. You're talking about werewolves. Like something out of a movie. I'm talking about something very real, Ivy said. Something your grandmother spent her entire life protecting you from, at great personal cost. She gave up everything she had once known to keep you and Colin safe, in a world that had no idea creatures like us existed. Mia's mind raced back through years of small, strange memories she had never examined too closely. The way her grandmother sometimes seemed to hear things from rooms away. The way she had insisted on moving 3 times before Mia turned 10, always citing vague reasons that never quite made sense. The strange herbs she grew in the garden and refused to explain. The old leather-bound journal she kept locked in a drawer that Mia had never been allowed to open. I need you to leave, Mia said again, more firmly this time, though her voice shook slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, and I have other tables to attend to. Ivy studied her for a long moment, before nodding slowly and reaching into her purse. She withdrew a small card and set it on the table, along with enough cash to cover her coffee and a generous tip. When you're ready to understand more, Ivy said, rising from the booth, call that number. And Mia, be careful who else you speak to about what happened 3 nights ago. Word travels quickly in our world, and not everyone who comes looking for you will have your best interests in mind. She walked out of the diner without another word, leaving Mia standing frozen beside the booth, the small card trembling slightly between her fingers, as she stared down at a phone number, and nothing else. No name, no explanation, just a series of digits that suddenly felt like the heaviest thing she had ever held in her hands. Draven received the report from Callum 4 days after their visit to the diner, and he read it twice before setting it down on his desk, his jaw tight with a mixture of frustration and something closer to fear than he wanted to admit. The paper trail on Mia Ellison ran cold almost immediately. Birth records showed she had been born in a small town 2 states away, raised from age 6 by a grandmother named Rosalind Ellison, after the deaths of her parents in a car accident. But Rosalind Ellison herself appeared to have no history prior to a certain date, no birth certificate, no school records, no trace of existence, before she suddenly appeared in that small town with 2 young children in tow. It's like she didn't exist before a certain point, Callum said, standing across from Draven's desk with his arms crossed. People don't just appear out of nowhere with 2 kids and no documentation, not unless they're hiding something significant. Or someone helped her disappear, Draven said quietly. That takes resources, connections, the kind of help that isn't easy to come by, unless you already belong to something bigger. Draven leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he considered the implications. If Rosalind Ellison had once been someone else entirely, someone who needed to vanish so completely that even careful searching turned up nothing, it suggested she had been running from something serious. And whatever she had been protecting her granddaughter from clearly hadn't stopped, simply because she chose to disappear. Did you find anything about the grandmother's actual origins? Draven asked. Nothing concrete, Callum said. But I did find something interesting, in an old records archive from the regional council. A reference to a bloodline dispute nearly 30 years ago, involving a family called Ashmore. Draven's head snapped up. Ashmore. You recognize the name. Every child raised in a ruling family recognizes that name, Draven said grimly. The Ashmore line was one of the oldest royal bloodlines in our history, older even than the Blackthorns. They ruled vast territories generations ago, before a war broke out between them and several allied packs, including our own ancestors. What happened to them? Officially, the line was wiped out, Draven said. Every recorded member of the family died during the conflict, or so the histories claim. The war ended with the Ashmore territories divided among the victorious packs, and the bloodline was declared extinct. Callum's expression darkened. But if a member survived, if she had children, grandchildren, then everything we believe about how those territories were divided, about the legitimacy of certain claims made during that war, could be called into question. Draven finished. An heir to the Ashmore line isn't just a curiosity, Callum. Depending on how old certain treaties are worded, she could represent a legal claim to land currently controlled by half a dozen different packs, including parts of our own territory. The weight of that realization settled heavily over both men. If word got out that an Ashmore heir had survived and was living quietly among humans, completely unaware of her own heritage, the political consequences could ripple across the entire region. Some packs would want to eliminate the threat before it could be recognized formally. Others might try to recruit her, to use her bloodline as leverage against rivals, and a few, the more traditional and honor-bound among them, might insist on restoring her rightful claims, regardless of how much chaos it caused. We need to bring her in, Callum said, before the elders find out through some other channel and take the decision out of our hands entirely. Bring her in how? Draven asked sharply. She has no idea what she is. If we approach her as pack representatives, demanding she come with us to discuss her supposed royal bloodline, she'll think we're insane, or dangerous, or both. We could trigger exactly the kind of panic that leads to an uncontrolled awakening. Then what do you suggest? Draven was quiet for a long moment, staring at the report on his desk without really seeing it. I need to go back, he said finally. Speak with her directly. Carefully. Let her come to trust the idea gradually, rather than dropping the entire truth on her all at once. That could take weeks, Callum said. Maybe longer. I'm aware, Draven said, but rushing this risks everything. Her safety, our position, the stability of the entire regional balance, if this becomes public before we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Callum studied his alpha for a long moment. Something unreadable moved behind his eyes. You're more invested in this than simple political concern would explain, he said quietly. Draven met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, though he didn't answer directly. The truth was, he had thought about Mia far more often over the past 4 days than he was comfortable admitting, replaying the calm, unbothered way she had spoken to him, the easy warmth in her laugh, when she thought no one important was watching. It wasn't simply political curiosity driving him back toward that diner. It was something else entirely, something he hadn't examined too closely yet, something that felt dangerous, in an entirely different way, than hidden bloodlines and ancient wars. I'm going back tonight, Draven said, rising from his desk. Alone. Draven. That's not wise. If she truly carries an awakening bloodline, and something triggers it unexpectedly while you're alone with her, then I'll handle it, Draven said firmly. I'm not bringing the entire pack down on her again. Last time nearly ended badly enough as it was. Callum's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, understanding that further argument wouldn't change his alpha's mind. At least let me stay nearby, in case something goes wrong. Draven considered this for a moment before nodding. Stay outside. Don't approach unless I call for you. As Draven prepared to leave, Callum lingered near the door, his expression conflicted, in a way Draven couldn't quite parse. What is it? Draven asked. Nothing, Callum said quickly. Just be careful. If the elders learn we've located a possible Ashmore heir, and kept it quiet this long, there will be consequences, regardless of how good your intentions were. I'm aware of the risk, Draven said, but some things are worth the risk. He left the pack house without further explanation, driving the familiar highway back toward Cedar Root Diner, with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread building in his chest. He had faced rival alphas without hesitation, had fought battles that left him bleeding and exhausted more times than he could easily count, but nothing in his memory quite compared to the nervous energy coiling through him as he approached the small diner glowing softly against the darkening evening sky. He didn't fully understand yet what Mia Ellison meant to him, or what she would come to mean once the truth of her heritage finally came to light. But he understood, with a certainty that surprised him, that he would do whatever necessary to protect her from the storm that was already gathering on the horizon, whether she wanted his protection or not. Mia hadn't slept properly since Ivy walked out of the diner 4 nights ago, leaving nothing behind but a phone number and a head full of questions she didn't know how to answer. She had carried the small card in her pocket every single day since, taking it out at odd moments to stare at the digits, always putting it away again without dialing. Tonight, after her shift ended and the diner grew quiet, she finally worked up the courage to call. The phone rang twice before Ivy answered. "I wondered how long it would take you," the older woman said, her voice calm and unsurprised. "You said my grandmother's real name was Elena Ashmore," Mia said, skipping any greeting entirely. "I need you to explain what that means. All of it. Are you somewhere private?" Mia glanced around the empty diner, Denny already gone for the night, the last customer having left 20 minutes earlier. "Yes." "Good. Then listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I promise you it's entirely true." Ivy explained slowly, patiently, the history of a world hidden alongside the ordinary one Mia had always known existed. Wolves who could take human form, organized into packs and territories, governed by ancient laws and older bloodlines, some more powerful than others. She explained the Ashmore line specifically, how it had once ruled vast stretches of land generations ago, respected and feared in equal measure for the strength of its bloodline, until a war broke out between the Ashmore family and a coalition of rival packs that wanted their territory for themselves. "Everyone believed the entire line died in that war," Ivy said. "But your grandmother survived. She was young at the time, barely more than a child herself, and she was smuggled out of the territory by loyal servants, moments before the final battle that wiped out the rest of her family. She spent the rest of her life hiding, first among distant relatives in other territories, and eventually among humans entirely, believing that was the only way to keep any surviving Ashmore blood safe from those who might still consider it a threat or a prize worth claiming." Mia sat down heavily in one of the booths, her mind struggling to absorb everything she was hearing. "You're saying I'm part of this, that I'm some kind of wolf." "You're an Ashmore," Ivy said simply. "Whether the wolf inside you has fully awakened yet, I don't know. Your grandmother worked incredibly hard to keep it suppressed, using old methods passed down through generations of hiding, methods meant to keep bloodlines dormant until it was safe for them to emerge. And you think something happened recently to change that?" "I felt a disturbance 4 nights ago," Ivy said. "A ripple in the old currents that those of us who remember the war have learned to watch for carefully. It led me directly to this diner, and to you. Something triggered a response in your dormant bloodline, something powerful enough to be felt across considerable distance by those attuned to it." Mia's mind went immediately to the strange pressure she had felt from Callum's dominance push, the way something inside her had risen instinctively to meet it, without her conscious permission. "There were wolves here," she said slowly. "A group of men. One of them tried something, some kind of pressure, and I didn't understand what was happening, but I didn't feel afraid the way I probably should have." "That would explain it," Ivy said, her voice tightening slightly with concern. "Do you know which pack they belong to?" "One of them mentioned his name, Draven. I don't know anything else about him." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Mia wondered if the call had dropped. "Ivy?" "Draven Blackthorn," Ivy said finally, her voice carrying a weight Mia didn't fully understand. "The Alpha King of one of the largest territories in this entire region. If he was here, if he felt whatever stirred inside you that night, then he almost certainly suspects exactly what you are." Mia's stomach twisted uncomfortably. "Is that dangerous? For me?" "It could be," Ivy said carefully. "It depends entirely on his intentions. Some alphas would see an Ashmore heir as an opportunity, a chance to strengthen their own claims through alliance or marriage. Others might see you as a threat to be eliminated before old territorial disputes can be reopened based on your bloodline's legal standing. I honestly don't know which category Draven Blackthorn falls into. His reputation is complicated. Fair by most accounts, but ruthless when he believes his territory is threatened." "What am I supposed to do?" Mia asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to sound. "For now, stay cautious," Ivy said. "Don't reveal anything more than you already have, And if he returns, which I suspect he will, given how thoroughly this kind of discovery tends to consume an alpha's attention, try to learn as much about his intentions as you can, before deciding whether to trust him with the full truth. You think he'll come back? I think, Ivy said slowly, that once an alpha catches even a glimpse of an old, powerful bloodline, especially one as significant as the Ashmore line, he won't be able to simply walk away and forget what he felt. Draven Blackthorn will come back, Mia. The only question is what he plans to do once he does. After the call ended, Mia sat alone in the empty diner for a long time, staring out at the dark parking lot, trying to reconcile everything she had just learned with the quiet, ordinary life she had built for herself over the past several years. She thought of her grandmother again, of the strict rules and careful evasions that had shaped her entire childhood, and for the first time, all of it finally made sense. Her grandmother hadn't been strange or overly cautious without reason. She had been protecting a secret so significant that entire territories might reshape themselves around its discovery. She had given up everything, her name, her history, her entire former life, simply to give Mia and Colin a chance at something ordinary and safe. And now, 4 nights after a spilled glass of water in a roadside diner, that carefully protected secret was unraveling, regardless of anything Mia wanted or chose for herself. She heard the soft chime of the front door opening behind her, and turned, half expecting Denny returning for something he'd forgotten. Instead, she found herself looking directly into a familiar pair of amber eyes, the same ones that had watched her so carefully 4 nights earlier, standing alone in the doorway, with an expression she couldn't quite read. I hope it's all right that I came back, Draven said quietly. I think we need to talk. Mia's heart pounded hard against her ribs as she rose slowly to her feet, gripping the edge of the booth for support. Whatever careful caution Ivy had recommended suddenly felt impossibly difficult to maintain, standing here alone, with the very Alpha King her newfound mentor had warned her about, his gaze steady and unreadable in the quiet, empty diner. Yeah, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. I think we do. Draven walked further into the diner, keeping a respectful distance between them, as Mia remained standing near the booth, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the silence stretching uncomfortably between them, until Draven finally broke it. I owe you an explanation, he said, for what happened here 4 nights ago, and for everything I'm about to tell you now. I already know some of it, Mia said quietly. A woman came to see me a few days ago, Ivy. She told me about the Ashmore bloodline, about wolves and packs, and a war I apparently have some connection to, even though I've never heard any of it before in my life. Something shifted in Draven's expression, surprise mixed with cautious relief. Ivy Marlowe found you already. You know her? By reputation, Draven said. She spent decades searching for surviving members of old bloodlines that were displaced or scattered during the wars. If she's found you, it means word is likely to spread faster than I'd hoped. Is that bad? Draven hesitated before answering honestly. It complicates things. Once certain packs learn an Ashmore heir exists, their reactions won't all be friendly. Some will want to protect you, or align themselves with your bloodline through alliance. Others may see you as a threat to territories they've held for generations, based on treaties signed after the war that ended your family's rule. Mia's arms tightened around herself. So people might want to hurt me. I won't let that happen, Draven said, his voice suddenly firm, carrying a weight that surprised even him. That's part of why I came back tonight. I need you to understand the situation clearly, and I need you to trust that I have no intention of letting harm come to you. Why would you care? Mia asked, her voice sharper than she intended. You don't know me. A few days ago, I was just a waitress who spilled water on your friend. Draven was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Because what happened 4 nights ago wasn't simply a curiosity to me, Mia. Discovering a surviving Ashmore heir is significant for reasons that go beyond politics and territory. It matters because bloodlines like yours, once fully awakened, carry strength that very few in our world can match. And it matters because I've thought about you more in the last 4 days than I've thought about almost anything else in years. The admission hung in the quiet diner between them, more honest than either of them had expected. Mia felt her cheeks warm slightly, despite the seriousness of everything else swirling through her mind. I don't understand any of this, she said finally, sitting back down heavily in the booth. 2 weeks ago, my biggest concern was whether I'd have enough money to help my brother catch up on his rent. Now you're telling me I'm secretly some kind of wolf royalty from a war I've never even heard of. Draven sat down across from her, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. I know it's overwhelming, but I promise you, everything Ivy told you is true, and there are people, myself included, who want to help you understand what's happening, rather than exploit it. How do I know I can trust you? She asked, searching his face carefully. You're an Alpha King. You said it yourself. Some packs might see me as valuable for exactly the reasons that make me dangerous to trust the wrong person. You don't know for certain, Draven admitted. Trust isn't something I can prove to you in one conversation. But I can tell you that I've kept this discovery quiet from almost everyone, including elders who would demand I report you immediately according to pack law. I've risked my own position by protecting your privacy this long, and I intend to keep doing so, regardless of what you decide to do next. Mia studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception in his expression, finding none that she could identify. Something about the steady, unwavering way he met her gaze made her chest tighten in a way she didn't fully understand, an echo of the same strange pull she had felt the very first night they met. What happens now? She asked quietly. That depends partly on you, Draven said. There are ways to begin understanding your bloodline safely, gradually, without triggering an uncontrolled awakening that could put you or others at risk. Ivy likely knows some of these methods already, given her experience with displaced bloodlines. I could offer resources of my own as well, protection, guidance, whatever you might need. And in exchange? Draven's jaw tightened slightly. I won't pretend there isn't a political dimension to this. An alliance with an Ashmore heir would strengthen my position considerably among other packs, but that's not why I'm here tonight, Mia. I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you, and because the idea of something happening to you while I stood by and did nothing was unacceptable to me. The honesty in his voice struck her more deeply than she expected, and for a moment, the weight of everything else, the ancient wars, the hidden bloodlines, the dangerous politics of a world she never knew existed, faded slightly beneath the simple, human reality of two people sitting across from each other in a quiet diner, trying to navigate something neither of them fully understood. I need time, she said finally, to process all of this, to talk to Ivy again, and maybe to my brother, though I'm honestly not sure how I'd even begin explaining any of it to him. Take whatever time you need, Draven said. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I only wanted you to understand the truth, and to know that you're not facing this alone, whether you choose to trust me or not. Mia nodded slowly, something in her chest loosening slightly at his words, though the weight of everything still pressed heavily against her. Thank you, she said quietly, for being honest with me, at least. Draven rose from the booth, though he lingered a moment longer, his gaze softening as he looked at her. If you need anything at all, you can reach me. He set a card down on the table, similar in size to the one Ivy had left days earlier, though the number printed on it was different. Day or night, I mean that. She picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers, as he walked toward the door. Just before he stepped outside, he paused and glanced back at her one final time. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad it was you. Whatever else this turns out to be, I'm glad the bloodline that survived belongs to someone like you. He left before she could respond, the door chiming softly shut behind him, and Mia sat alone in the empty diner for a long time afterward, staring at the two small cards now resting side by side on the table, wondering which direction her strange, unraveling life was about to take her. Callum sat alone in his car, across the street from the diner, watching Draven's silhouette move through the lit windows, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He had promised to wait outside, to stay uninvolved unless called upon, but every minute that passed only sharpened the unease building steadily in his chest. He had spent 6 years as Draven's beta, second in command of one of the most respected territories in the region, and he had built his entire identity around that position, around the loyalty and trust his alpha placed in him. But watching Draven walk into that diner tonight, watching the careful, deliberate way he'd chosen his words before leaving, Callum recognized something he hadn't wanted to admit to himself until now. Draven wasn't simply protecting a political asset, he was falling for her. And if that happened, if the Alpha King of the Blackthorn territory bonded himself to an Ashmore heir, formed an alliance strong enough to reshape old treaties and reopen disputes long considered settled. Callum's own position within the pack hierarchy would shift dramatically. Territories that had been quietly absorbed into Blackthorn land following the Ashmore collapse generations ago might suddenly face renewed legal challenges. Alliances he had spent years cultivating with neighboring packs could collapse overnight if those packs saw Draven's growing power as newly threatening. He told himself his concerns were purely strategic, protecting the stability of the territory he had sworn to serve. But beneath that reasoning sat something rawer, an old, familiar fear of losing status, of watching someone else's rise diminish his own carefully built place in the world. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from an unfamiliar number, though the content made his stomach tighten with sudden, sharp anxiety. "We know what your alpha is protecting. The elders will want to hear about this directly from someone loyal to proper pack law, rather than discovering it themselves later, when it's too late to act carefully. Contact us if you wish to discuss this quietly." Callum stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't recognize the number, but the phrasing suggested someone connected to the regional council, someone with enough awareness of pack politics to understand exactly what kind of leverage this information represented. He could delete the message, ignore it entirely, trust Draven's judgment the way he always had, and hope his alpha's instincts about handling this situation carefully proved correct. Or he could respond, position himself as the loyal beta who brought a dangerous situation to proper authority before it spiraled out of control, protecting the pack from an alpha whose judgment had clearly been compromised by personal feelings he had no business indulging. He thought again of Draven's face inside that diner, the softness in his expression as he spoke to Mia, utterly unlike the calculated, controlled alpha Callum had known for years. Whatever this was, it wasn't simple political strategy anymore. And unchecked personal feelings, in Callum's experience, rarely led to sound leadership decisions. His thumb moved before he fully decided to let it. "I can meet," he typed, "tomorrow evening. I need assurance this stays contained and handled properly, without unnecessary violence toward the girl herself." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood. We only wish to manage this according to proper law. Location will follow shortly." Callum set the phone down on the passenger seat, staring straight ahead at the diner's glowing windows, telling himself repeatedly that he was doing the right thing, protecting pack law and stability, rather than acting out of jealousy or wounded pride. He almost believed it. When Draven finally emerged from the diner and returned to the car, Callum forced his expression into careful neutrality, offering no indication of the conversation that had just occurred. "How did it go?" Callum asked, as Draven settled into the passenger seat. "Better than I expected," Draven said, though his tone carried a weight of complicated emotion he didn't fully explain. "She already knows some of the truth. Ivy Marlowe found her days ago." Callum's jaw tightened slightly. "That complicates things." "It does," Draven agreed. "Which is exactly why we need to move carefully from here. No mistakes, Callum. Her safety depends on us handling this properly." "Of course," Callum said, starting the car and pulling out onto the dark highway, his mind already turning over the meeting he had just arranged, wondering whether he had just made the gravest mistake of his life or the most necessary decision he'd ever made for the pack he had sworn to protect. The following evening, Callum drove to an isolated warehouse on the edge of Blackthorn territory, following directions sent to his phone by the same unfamiliar number. He told Draven he was handling routine border patrol duties, a lie that settled uncomfortably in his stomach, but didn't stop him from driving forward anyway. Inside the warehouse, 3 men waited for him, their postures carrying the unmistakable authority of senior council enforcers, men whose job it was to ensure pack law was upheld across every territory in the region, regardless of individual alpha preferences. "Thank you for coming," the eldest of them said, stepping forward with a calm, measured expression that put Callum immediately on edge. "You've done the right thing, bringing this to proper attention." "I want it understood clearly," Callum said, his voice firmer than he felt inside. "I'm not interested in seeing the girl harmed. I only want this handled according to law, rather than allowed to develop into something that destabilizes the entire region, because one alpha lost his objectivity." "Of course," the enforcer said smoothly. "Our only interest is ensuring proper procedure is followed. Tell us everything you know." Callum hesitated only a moment before beginning to speak, laying out everything he had learned about Mia Ellison, about her grandmother's true identity, about the strange resistance she had shown to his own dominance push days earlier, about Draven's growing personal attachment that Callum feared was clouding his judgment beyond any reasonable recovery. As he spoke, he told himself repeatedly that he was protecting the pack, protecting stability, protecting proper law from an alpha too distracted by personal feelings to see the danger clearly. He didn't allow himself to consider, not fully, not yet, exactly what these enforcers intended to do with the information he was providing, or how quickly loyalty and jealousy could blur together, until neither he nor anyone else could easily tell them apart. By the time he finished, the eldest enforcer wore a ghost gaze, expression of quiet, satisfied calculation that should have worried Callum considerably more than it did. "You've been very helpful," the enforcer said. "We'll take it from here." Callum drove home that night with a knot of unease, sitting heavy in his stomach, telling himself once again that he had done the right thing, even as some quiet, honest part of him understood that he had just set something dangerous into motion that he might not be able to stop. 3 nights later, Mia closed the diner alone, later than usual after a busy evening rush left the cleanup taking longer than expected. Denny had left early, trusting her to lock up, and she moved through the familiar routine with practiced ease, her mind still turning over everything Draven had told her, still uncertain what decision she wanted to make about the strange, unraveling truth of her own existence. She had called Ivy again 2 days earlier, and together they had begun discussing careful methods to help Mia understand her dormant bloodline safely, small exercises meant to help her sense the wolf sleeping beneath her skin, without forcing it toward a sudden, dangerous awakening. Progress had been slow, but real, and for the first time since this entire strange situation began, Mia had started to feel less like a victim of circumstances beyond her control, and more like someone gradually reclaiming ownership over her own heritage. She had just finished locking the front door, and was walking toward her car in the empty parking lot, when she noticed 3 unfamiliar vehicles parked at the far edge of the lot, engines off, headlights dark. Her instincts, sharper now than they had been even weeks earlier, prickled with sudden alarm. She quickened her pace toward her car, fumbling for her keys, when 4 men stepped out from between the parked vehicles, moving with the same predatory smoothness she remembered from Draven's pack, though these faces were unfamiliar to her. "Mia Ellison," the tallest among them said, his voice carrying an authority that made the air around her feel suddenly heavier, pressing against her chest, the same way Callum's dominance push had weeks earlier. "We need you to come with us quietly." "Who are you?" she demanded, backing toward the diner's locked door, her heart hammering hard against her ribs. "Regional Council enforcers," the man said, "acting under proper authority to investigate an unregistered bloodline. If you cooperate, this doesn't need to become difficult." Fear surged through her, sharp and immediate, but beneath it, something else stirred as well. A low, steady heat building at the base of her spine, the same strange sensation she had felt the very first night Callum tried his dominance push against her. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the pounding fear beneath it. The enforcer's expression hardened. That wasn't a request. He moved toward her fast, faster than any ordinary man should have been able to move, and Mia felt the world around her suddenly slow down, every detail sharpening into painful clarity, the heat at the base of her spine surging upward through her chest and into her limbs with startling, overwhelming force. She didn't consciously decide to fight back. Her body simply reacted, some ancient instinct rising up from beneath years of careful suppression, and when the enforcer's hand closed around her wrist, she twisted free with a strength that shocked both of them equally, sending him stumbling backward several feet. The other 3 enforcers exchanged startled glances before moving in together, and Mia felt something inside her chest crack open entirely, a dam finally giving way after years of careful, quiet containment. Her vision sharpened further, colors becoming impossibly vivid even in the dim parking lot lighting, every sound suddenly audible with startling clarity, the enforcers' heartbeats, their breathing, the soft rustle of fabric as they shifted their stances to surround her. "Hold her down," the lead enforcer barked, and 2 of the others lunged forward simultaneously. Mia moved before conscious thought could catch up with her body, ducking beneath one attacker's reach and driving her elbow backward into his ribs, with enough force to send him crashing into a parked car, the metal denting visibly beneath the impact. The second attacker grabbed for her shoulder, and she spun sharply, gold light flashing briefly across her vision, as something ancient and powerful surged fully awake inside her, for the very first time in her life. Headlights swept suddenly across the parking lot, as another vehicle screeched to a stop nearby, and Draven emerged from it at a dead run, having received an urgent, panicked call from Ivy, only minutes earlier, warning him that something dangerous was unfolding at the diner. He took in the scene instantly, Mia standing amid 4 enforcers, her eyes now fully gold, power radiating from her in visible waves that bent the air around her like heat rising from summer pavement. "Stand down," Draven roared, his own dominance surging outward with the full weight of his alpha authority, forcing 2 of the enforcers immediately to their knees despite themselves. The lead enforcer, still recovering his balance, turned toward Draven with a sneer. "This doesn't concern you, Blackthorn. She's an unregistered bloodline. Regional law demands she be brought before the council. She's under my protection," Draven said, his voice carrying a lethal calm that made even the remaining enforcers hesitate. "Leave now, or face the consequences of attacking a protected member of my territory." "She's not registered as your territory's responsibility," the enforcer argued, though his confidence wavered visibly under the weight of Draven's presence. "She is now," Draven said, moving to stand beside Mia, his shoulder nearly brushing hers as he faced down the enforcers together. "And you've just assaulted her without proper cause or documentation. I'd reconsider your next move very carefully." The lead enforcer glanced between his remaining companions, weighing the risks of continuing against an Alpha King defending his territory directly, against the reality that whatever advantage they'd hoped to gain through surprise had already evaporated entirely. Finally, he gestured sharply to his men, and they retreated toward their vehicles, disappearing into the darkness moments later, leaving the parking lot suddenly, eerily quiet. Mia stood trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as the surge of power slowly receded, her eyes fading gradually back to their ordinary brown. Draven turned to her immediately, his hands hovering carefully near her shoulders without quite touching her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled worry. "I don't know," she said honestly, staring down at her own trembling hands. "What just happened to me?" "Your bloodline finally woke up," Draven said quietly. "Fully. All at once, forced awake by the attack. I've never seen anything like it. The power you just displayed." "Someone did this," Mia said, anger cutting through the lingering fear. "Someone told them where to find me. How else would they have known?" Draven's expression darkened as an uncomfortable suspicion settled into place. He thought immediately of Callum's strange behavior over recent days, the tension he had noticed but chosen to dismiss as simple professional concern. "I think I know who," he said grimly. "And if I'm right, this betrayal goes deeper than either of us realized." Draven confronted Callum that same night, calling him to the pack house the moment he had escorted Mia safely to a secure location, under Ivy's watchful care. Callum arrived within the hour, his expression carefully composed, though Draven noticed the slight, telltale tension around his eyes the moment he walked through the door. "4 enforcers attacked Mia tonight," Draven said without preamble, watching Callum's face closely for any reaction. "Someone gave them her location, along with detailed information about her bloodline that only a handful of people knew." Callum's composure flickered, just barely, before settling back into place. "That's terrible," he said. "Is she all right?" "She's alive," Draven said. "No thanks to whoever betrayed her location to the council." "You think someone within the pack did this?" Callum asked, though his voice carried a strain that hadn't been there moments earlier. "I know someone did," Draven said, his voice hardening. "The only people who knew the full extent of what we'd learned were you, Foster, and myself. Foster has been with me since childhood, and I trust him completely. That leaves you, Callum." The silence stretched heavily between them, Callum's jaw working as though searching for words that might somehow soften what was coming. "I thought I was protecting the pack," Callum finally admitted, his voice quieter than Draven had ever heard it. "I saw the way you were with her, Draven, personal feelings clouding judgment that affects our entire territory's stability. I told myself I was following proper procedure, bringing dangerous information to appropriate authority before it spiraled out of control." "You nearly got her killed," Draven said, his voice dangerously low, the weight of his authority pressing hard against the room. 4 enforcers cornered her alone, unprepared, forced her into an uncontrolled awakening that could have destroyed her entirely, if it had gone even slightly differently. I didn't intend for it to go that far, Callum said, though the excuse sounded hollow, even to his own ears. I only wanted the council to handle things properly. You handed a vulnerable young woman over to enforcers who had every intention of either controlling her or eliminating her as a threat, Draven said. There is no version of that decision that qualifies as protecting proper procedure, Callum. That was betrayal, plain and simple, born from jealousy you couldn't bring yourself to name honestly. Callum's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining visibly out of him as the truth of Draven's words settled in. What happens now? He asked quietly. You're removed as beta, effective immediately, Draven said, and you'll answer to the council yourself for endangering an Ashmore heir through unauthorized disclosure of protected information. Whatever consequences follow from that will be entirely your own to bear. Callum nodded slowly, offering no further argument, and Draven watched him leave the pack house for the final time, a complicated mixture of anger and old, weary loyalty settling uneasily in his chest. 3 days later, once Mia had rested, and Ivy had helped her begin steadying the newly awakened power still settling within her, Draven called a formal gathering of regional pack leaders, a rare event reserved only for matters of significant importance across multiple territories. Mia stood beside him as he addressed the assembled alphas, her nerves carefully hidden beneath a calm, steady composure that surprised even herself. She wore simple clothing, nothing elaborate or ceremonial, because as Draven had told her privately beforehand, her strength needed no costume to prove itself legitimate. Many of you have already heard rumors, Draven said, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd, that an heir of the Ashmore bloodline has been found, alive and awakened, after decades of believing that line entirely extinct. I'm here to confirm those rumors, and to formally introduce Mia Ellison, last surviving heir of the Ashmore territories. Murmurs rippled through the gathered leaders, some curious, some clearly calculating the political implications already forming behind their eyes. Mia stood tall despite the weight of so many unfamiliar gazes fixed upon her, drawing on the same quiet, patient strength that had carried her through years of difficult diner customers and long, exhausting shifts. Several days ago, Draven continued, his voice hardening slightly, council enforcers attempted to seize Mia against her will, acting on information illegally obtained through betrayal within my own pack. That betrayal has already been addressed. But I want it understood clearly, by everyone present, that Mia Ellison is under my protection, and any further attempt to threaten her safety will be treated as a direct act of aggression against Blackthorn territory itself. A tense silence followed his words before one of the older alphas, a woman named Corinne who led a smaller but respected territory to the east, spoke up. And what are your intentions, Draven, regarding an Ashmore heir's legal claims to territory currently held by several packs in this room? Draven glanced at Mia briefly before answering. That will be Mia's decision to make, in her own time, once she's had the opportunity to fully understand her heritage and what it means. I won't speak for her intentions, nor will I allow anyone else in this room to pressure her into decisions before she's ready to make them. Mia stepped forward slightly, drawing every eye in the room toward her directly. I didn't grow up knowing any of this, she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. 2 weeks ago, I was simply a waitress, trying to help my brother pay his bills. I'm not interested in reclaiming old territories through conflict, or destabilizing anyone's carefully built stability out of some sense of ancient entitlement, but I am the last of my family's bloodline, and I intend to understand exactly what that means, on my own terms, with people I trust helping guide me through it. Her words settled over the room with unexpected weight, and several alphas exchanged glances that suggested grudging respect forming where suspicion had stood only moments earlier. In the months that followed, Mia gradually stepped into her heritage, working closely with Ivy to understand the full scope of her awakened bloodline, while also maintaining the ordinary parts of her life she refused to abandon entirely. She continued visiting her brother regularly, finally able to help him more substantially, once Draven insisted on providing resources befitting her true standing. Resources she initially resisted, before eventually accepting as simply another part of the new reality she was learning to navigate. Her relationship with Draven deepened slowly, built not on political convenience, but on the genuine respect and care that had grown steadily since that very first night at the diner. He never pressured her, never rushed the process of her understanding her own power or her feelings toward him, allowing everything to develop naturally in its own time. Nearly a year after that first strange, fateful encounter, Draven formally claimed Mia not simply as his mate, but as an equal partner whose bloodline strengthened rather than threatened the stability of the territories surrounding them. The ceremony was attended by pack leaders from across the region, including several who had once viewed her existence with wary suspicion, now standing as witnesses to an alliance that promised to reshape old rivalries into something more stable and cooperative than the region had known in generations. Mia stood beside Draven that day, dressed simply, despite the significance of the occasion, exactly as she had been the very first night they met. She thought often, in quiet moments, of her grandmother's careful sacrifice, of the strength she had unknowingly carried within her for years, before finally understanding its full weight and purpose. She had once been simply a waitress, unaware that anything extraordinary slept quietly beneath her ordinary life. Now, she stood as proof that true strength had never depended on titles or ancient claims, but on the quiet, unshakable steadiness that had carried her through every difficult night, long before she ever understood exactly what she was.